Well, my team met with the Cruz people, and they made a recommendation to me. I said, I think it's fair because, you know, in some places we haven't spent a lot of resources. I don't see this as any big deal, other than the fact that I'm not going to spend resources in Indiana. He's not going to spend them in other places. So what? What's the big deal?
We're focusing our energy on the state of Indiana, and Governor Kasich is focusing his energies elsewhere. I think that is a decision, an allocation of resources that makes a lot of sense, and it's devoted to the principle of beating Hillary Clinton in November and turning this country around.
Ted Cruz and John Kasich have devised a divide-and-conquer plan to deny the Trump candidacy delegates he needs to clinch the Republican nomination. But will this plan work? Our elections director, Anthony Salvanto, has been looking into how voters in Indiana might respond. So, Anthony, thanks for being here, first of all.
Thank you, bud.
So, Kasich is leaving Indiana to Ted Cruz. I mean, he has supporters in Indiana, although he wasn't expected to win there. But what does this sort of look like to you on paper?
Well, right. So Kasich, in our latest poll, we just finished it yesterday, you know, he's in third place in Indiana. And yes, he does have supporters. But all of this is predicated on this idea that somehow then Kasich supporters might go to Ted Cruz. Well, look, we've got this poll now that shows us that Kasich's voters would be just as upset or dissatisfied with a Ted Cruz nomination as they would have with a Donald Trump nomination. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily portend that then all of his voters go to Ted Cruz. And you know, the other thing is that John Kasich's voters are voting for John Kasich. 3/4 of them say that their vote is for John Kasich, not against anyone else. Only 1/4 of them actually say that their purpose in voting for Kasich is to stop Trump. So, you know, sometimes we all like to think that voters have these strategic calculations and they, oh, well, I vote for him, then he'll go on and move there. And that's, you know, like it's a big chessboard.
Right.
It's not. People vote for the candidate that they like. And if there isn't a candidate that they like around, maybe they just don't vote.
But given the fact that Cruz is, I mean, he's doing better than Kasich is doing there, doesn't that sort of portend well for his supporters? Look, he's going to be heavily campaigning in the state, although I know it's a difficult state to poll.
Yeah. For Cruz's voters, here's the assumption that we want to challenge. They're not all against Donald Trump either. In fact, while most of them would not vote for Donald Trump, there is a sizable number of Ted Cruz voters who would be at least satisfied with Trump as the nominee. And if you step back, you think, well, this makes some sense. Both of them have already been campaigning as outsiders. Now, they have different platforms and they have different ideas, but they have been generally campaigning as outsiders. It might not surprise that even here, if you look at Cruz voters, that 42% of them are going to be at least satisfied if Trump is the nominee. Underpinning all of that is the fact that, let's suppose Trump has to then pick off some of these voters if they become free agents. Trump is already leading. So if he pulls some of these voters away too, that would only just extend his lead. He wouldn't have to get all of them.
And to pull some of those voters away, could it be that maybe they sense something is amiss, this idea, which seems unprecedented, that these two different campaigns would, what Mr. Trump called collude, to deny him his win in Indiana if he is the one that has the most delegates?
Yeah, that's a great question. So two things. One is that 40% of Ted Cruz's voters are voting in part to try to stop Donald Trump. That leaves the rest of them out there. Well, on the point about collusion, when you look at Donald Trump's voters, they already feel that the system is unfair. They already feel, 66% of them, at least in Indiana, but we've seen this in other states too, Vlad, they feel the system is not fair, even as their candidate is leading that process. So when Donald Trump comes out and talks about a rigged system, talks about collusion, what we see in the polling is that that only hardens his support, because it's already something that his voters and a lot of others already agree with. So some of that narrative could actually play into Donald Trump's existing strength.
And so help us understand Indiana. I mean, it seems like a more establishment type state when it comes to the Republican Party. And I know that's very difficult to poll there, but so if that is the case, then, you know, why wouldn't Kasich be doing a little better?
Yeah, you know, look, every primary has its challenges in polling. But the polls have actually been very consistent this week in showing that Donald Trump is leading in Indiana. The reason that that is important is after tomorrow we're going to get the Atlantic primaries, and Donald Trump is expected to do well there. We know he's leading in Pennsylvania. He's expected to do well elsewhere. He will then come out of April with at least over 900 delegates on his way to that magic 1237. The next stop on that train is Indiana in early May. And this is a place where those who are trying to stop Trump have sort of set up camp. We're seeing that now. And the feeling is that if somebody else can grab the majority of Indiana's delegates, that Trump would still be leading, but Trump would have a harder time than going on to the West Coast and getting over that magic number. Okay? That's why Indiana is set up that way. It is a conservative state, but it is not an overwhelmingly conservative state. In fact, when you ask the voters there what they want, some of them, about a third, say they want the candidate who'll do the most conservative things, and everybody else says, do whatever it takes. Do whatever it takes to fix the economy. And those do whatever it takes voters are the ones that Trump is winning.
Drama in the Hoosier State. Anthony Salvanto, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
It's fine.
And remember, stick with CBSN for day-long coverage of tomorrow's primaries. Voters in Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland. And remember, stick with CBSN for day-long coverage of tomorrow's primaries. Voters in Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island will all head to the polls. Our primetime coverage starts tomorrow night at 6 Eastern. We'll have analysis and bring you the results as they come in.